Your title's just for show, Richard said, smiling like he'd just told a joke that would win him another round of golf with the board. The room laughed. I did not. I sat there, stone-faced, with my notebook open and pen steady, pretending I hadn't just been publicly castrated in the middle of a leadership meeting. The title in question? Vice President of Regulatory Affairs. Sounded impressive, didn't it? Felt less so when you realized they only pulled me into the room after every major decision had already been made, just so they could say they'd run it past compliance. I'd spent the better part of 3 years watching Richard Dane and his boys' club run venturing capital like it was their personal Vegas table. They loved the flash, ESG buzzwords, linked in virtue signaling, influencer partnerships with climate-conscious yogas. God forbid someone ask if our sustainable investments actually passed muster with the SEC. Richard didn't care about muster. He cared about margins, and me? I was their corporate fire extinguisher, left in the glass case labeled break in case of audit. Not that they ever did. One time, after a deal closed, Richard looked at me across the conference room and said, "We're going to need a compliance rubber stamp, sweetheart." I was holding a 17-page risk memo that might as well have been written in invisible ink, because he didn't even glance at it. By the way, if you've made it this far, and you're enjoying the slow boil of corporate delusion and passive-aggressive sarcasm, do us a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button and give us a like. 90% of folks just listen without it, and trust me, every tap helps our little team keep uncorking these boardroom nightmares. No pressure, but Richard Dane would definitely forget to do it. Anyway, I wasn't naive. I knew exactly what I was to these people, a checklist item, a diversity bullet point, an afterthought with a 401k. What they didn't know, or didn't bother remembering, was that I wasn't just a box checker. I had been certified in every financial compliance framework you could throw a dart at. I'd interned with the very agency they were now trying to dance around. I'd written white papers, given lectures, and built compliance workflows from the ground up. But sure, Richard, just for show. The worst part wasn't the erasure. It was the theater of inclusion. They'd invite me to strategy meetings, then schedule them last minute, conveniently during the compliance offsite I was leading, or they'd CC me on decisions already inked, then throw me under the bus if a filing hiccuped. 1 week. They forwarded me ESG fund documentation that had more holes than a golf course and said, "Should be fine, right?" Right. It started with the little things, dates that didn't match, vendor certifications that had mysteriously vanished, investment summaries claiming green partnerships with firms that didn't even exist on the Department of Energy's radar. I flagged a few things, nothing dramatic, just quiet emails. "Hi Richard, just a heads up. May need to double-check the climate impact scores on that solar initiative in Zone 6. His reply? "Relax, Tessa. We have friends at the agency." That was his mantra, "We have friends," like we were on some exclusive yacht with regulators waving from the dock. But I didn't relax, not because I was some rule-worshipping bureaucrat, because I could smell the smoke curling behind the PowerPoint slides, and I'd seen how fast fire spreads when it's ESG flavored. I started backing things up, quietly, discreetly. I made a copy of every report I submitted, every signed filing, every internal chat thread that mentioned creative accounting. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I'd need it, if not to protect the company, then to protect myself. And then, one afternoon, I got an automated notification from HR. My classification had changed. No announcement, no explanation. Just a quiet reclassification in the employee database from executive officer to support function. Support function, like a stapler, like a coffee machine. I clicked through the policy manual to check if that change meant anything. Turns out, it meant a lot. Because a clause I'd only half remembered in my employment agreement started tingling at the back of my skull. A clause about internal compliance submissions, and what to do if an executive-level officer believed regulatory misconduct had occurred but was being ignored. The company, in its glossy commitment to transparency, had set up a government-registered oversight channel. Barely anyone used it. Most didn't even know it existed. I knew. And suddenly, for the first time in months, I felt something stirring under the dull ache of dismissal. Not anger, not fear. Clarity. The binder slapped down on my desk like a verdict. ESG certification binder portfolio D. 2 inches thick, glossy tab dividers. Probably cost more to print than it would have to actually make half these projects sustainable. On the cover, a big, proud venturing capital logo, and beneath it, in italics, the words "Advancing Climate Integrity Through Responsible Growth." I flipped open to page 1 and immediately felt that tickle again, the one just behind my eyes. The one I got when something didn't add up. Like when a guy says he's plant-based but still smells like beef jerky. The Zone 6 solar project, our poster child for sustainable impact, had a verified emission offset score from a third-party firm I'd never heard of. I Googled the name. The website looked like it had been built in 2008, with a footer that read, "This site is under construction." I checked the file again. Their audit claimed a carbon offset ratio higher than Tesla's entire Nevada gigafactory. Sure, and I'm a unicorn that poops wind credits. There were 3 more like that. one wind farm with no turbine specs, a wastewater initiative that hadn't even broken ground but was already logged as active impact, and my personal favorite, a forest conservation fund that listed its primary environmental partner as a company that had been fined twice for illegal logging. That one deserved a plaque. I closed the binder slowly and stared at the glass wall of my office. My reflection looked tired, but something was waking up underneath. Not rage, not yet, just that itch behind the teeth. The one that whispered they're not just careless. They think you're too dumb to notice, so I asked for a meeting, not a big one. Just Richard, the CFO, Jeff, and me. Richard showed up 10 minutes late, AirPods in, probably mid-podcast about his own greatness. Jeff was already there, sipping a protein shake like it was the antidote to having a spine. I laid the binder on the conference table and slid it toward them. There are discrepancies in the ESG documentation, I said, tapping the pages. Some of these projects don't have verifiable data, and we've certified them as audited and compliant. Richard didn't even look. He just leaned back in his chair and smiled like I'd complimented his tie. I've got friends at the agency, Tessa. You worry too much. Jeff shifted in his seat, eyes darting between us. I waited for him to say something. Anything, he didn't. He just adjusted his cuffs and stared at the table like it owed him money. I'm not worried, I said carefully. I'm documenting. That got Richard's attention. His eyes narrowed just slightly, then he chuckled. You're adorable when you play lawyer. I smiled back, razor thin, and you're adorable when you play CEO. Didn't like that. The meeting ended 2 minutes later with a wave of his hand and a reminder to stay in my lane, so I did, sort of. That afternoon, I started syncing everything, email threads, slide decks, PDF versions of signed ESG disclosures, to an encrypted external drive I kept in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, hidden behind a stack of compliance binders nobody ever touched. I wasn't preparing for war. Not yet. Just survival. A woman's version of digging a foxhole in the middle of picnic. I also started keeping a physical notebook, not the company-issued one with our logo on the front, a plain black moleskine with no label. I wrote down meeting dates, project names, who approved what and when, and any time I heard something off. Like when Richard said, optics matter more than substance, just make sure the words match the vibes, or when Jeff muttered, let's just get through Q2 before we nitpick the truth. Nitpick the truth. I underlined that one twice. Every day another data point, every week another inch of rope. Still, I wasn't ready to make a move. I told myself I was just being cautious. Smart. After all, maybe it was just exaggeration, a little corporate puffery. Maybe Richard really did have friends in high places. Maybe Jeff really was just trying to stay afloat. But the feeling didn't leave. It hung in my chest like smoke from a candle no one remembered lighting. And then something small happened that sharpened it all. An intern, bless her caffeine-addled soul, forwarded me the press packet for our upcoming Green Horizons media launch. The ESG portfolio was the crown jewel, centerpiece of the whole thing. And there, in bold, was a line that made my stomach drop, verified under direct oversight by our VP of Regulatory Affairs, Tessa Langley. I hadn't signed off on any of it. I hadn't even seen the final packet. But there it was, my name, my job title, and a lie printed on company letterhead. I sat back in my chair, staring at that sentence. Then I picked up my pen, opened the moleskine to a fresh page, and wrote. They just handed me the matchbook. The article dropped on a Thursday. I remember because Richard made us all gather in the glass conference room at 9 a.m. sharp. Yes, even those of us usually treated like office furniture, and passed out copies like Santa with stock options. Venture Capital's $200M Green Fund sets new industry standard, the headline bragged. Subhead, exclusive interview with CEO Richard Dane on ethics, innovation, and environmental leadership. Room smelled like fresh coffee and stale self-congratulation. The article was a symphony of recycled buzzwords. Trailblazing, mission-driven, regulatory rigor. My favorite was a quote attributed to Richard. We embed compliance into every stage of our investment strategy. I nearly choked on my coffee. Embed? If by embed he meant duct tape it on after launch and hope no one notices the cracks, then sure. I flipped through the pages out of morbid curiosity. Whole section on oversight with a graphic showing a fake-looking compliance pipeline and a caption, audited under VP oversight. Guess whose name wasn't in the article? Guess whose job title was erased from the org chart they printed for the investor handout? No mention, not one line, not even a photo in the team spread, though I'd reviewed and flagged half the filings they were now waving in front of the press like holy scripture. After the meeting, I walked straight to legal. Not Richard, not Jeff, just the lawyers. I figured if anyone still knew how to read English around here, it'd be them. I met with Kendra from internal counsel, sharp woman, wore her hair in a bun so tight it looked like it might snap her thoughts into place. I slid the binder across her desk. These documents were filed under my review authority, I said, but they've been altered. Some signatures are missing, others were backdated. The latest investor disclosures, I didn't approve any of that. She nodded, scanned a few pages, then leaned back. Tessa, I hear you, she said, but executive discretion overrides in strategic presentations. If leadership wanted to adjust language for public-facing materials, that's within their scope. So ethics are optional now? I asked. No, she said gently. They're flexible. I walked out without saying another word, because I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd start laughing and never stop. Later that afternoon, while digging through archived personnel docs to prep my rebuttal, I saw it. A small, automated update in the internal HR portal. Reclassification officer level changed. Tessa Langley right arrow support function non-exec. No fanfare, no notice. Just a quiet demotion backdated 3 weeks. They hadn't even bothered to tell me. I sat there, motionless, staring at the screen, and something inside me clicked. Not like a snap, more like the sound of a deadbolt turning. The lock wasn't on my cage, it was on theirs. I remembered the clause, buried deep in the onboarding packet. Most people skipped it. Hell, I skipped it the first time too, until I did my own audit of corporate compliance policies last year and found something odd. Little provision that said if a designated executive officer believed internal processes had failed to address regulatory breaches, they could file a sealed memorandum through a government-registered compliance conduit. It wasn't even digital. You had to send a certified copy, notarized, to an address that hadn't been updated since 2009. Here's the kicker. The clause was only valid if the memo was authored while the person held an officer title. 3 weeks ago I had, so I went home that night, poured a glass of wine, and opened a fresh document. Subject line, Preliminary Compliance Irregularities ESG Portfolio D. I started writing, not emotionally, not angrily, just methodically. I outlined every discrepancy I'd flagged in the last 6 months, linked each to its source. Attached supporting documents, included timelines, approval chains, and screenshots. I flagged every instance of altered certification language and clearly identified what I had and hadn't signed off on. For each claim, I added a footnote citing the relevant SEC guideline, internal policy clause, or external audit standard. It wasn't just a memo. It was a legal roadmap. And if they ever tried to bury it, I'd already printed 3 copies, 2 of which now lived in lockboxes in places I didn't even tell my own reflection. Last thing I added was a line that took me 10 minutes to write. This memo was compiled while the author held the formal title of Vice President, Regulatory Affairs, Officer Level, as confirmed in HR records dated timestamp. I didn't send it that night. I waited until morning, let myself sleep on it, see if maybe, just maybe, someone from legal or HR would come to their senses. But they didn't. So at 9:17 a.m. the next day, I sealed the envelope, walked to the certified mail desk in the building lobby, and addressed it to the oversight channel listed in the company's own documentation. Then I went back upstairs, opened my Moleskine, and added one more line. Memo filed. Game on. The memo vanished like a coin tossed into a well, no splash, no echo, just swallowed. I tracked the delivery confirmation from USPS, saw the little green checkbox and timestamp, and then nothing. No call, no reply, no acknowledgement from the oversight liaison, no tremor in the building. You'd think reporting possible federal securities fraud might at least get you a stern hallway nod. Instead, I was erased. Subtly, methodically. First, my calendar started thinning. Recurring meetings I'd always attended, compliance syncs, audit prep, risk review boards, suddenly showed canceled or were mysteriously rescheduled to times I was double booked. When I asked Kendra from legal if I'd missed something, she gave me the HR equivalent of a shoulder shrug, leadership streamlining some processes. You're still looped in where necessary. Apparently, necessary no longer included the $200M ESG fund I'd been shepherding since its inception. Then came the reassignment. Richard didn't bother to tell me himself. He sent Caroline, his E, like I was being evicted by courier. She slid a manila folder onto my desk and said, "New task list per Richard. You'll be helping with internal newsletter drafts and reviewing social media compliance language." Newsletter drafts. I was a certified compliance strategist with 2 decades of experience, reassigned to spell check LinkedIn captions about Earth Day. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at that folder like it was an obituary written for a version of me they'd already buried. Next week was a slow bleed. My inbox, once a minefield of deal memos and urgent review requests, now held event invites, vague company culture surveys, and one email with the subject line Employee Yoga Challenge. I wasn't even invited to the Q3 Capital Review, which used to be my Super Bowl. I sat through it anyway, just walked in, sat in the back corner, and took notes like a ghost auditing its own funeral. No one stopped me. No one acknowledged me either. A few days later, I got the real gut punch. It came from Paul, a junior analyst I'd mentored since his internship days. He cornered me near the kitchen and leaned in like he was telling me where the bodies were buried. "Hey," he said quietly, eyes flicking down the hallway. "Don't quote me, but I overheard something in Richard's office. They're planning Q4 cuts. Your name came up." I blinked. "Cuts? I just got reassigned." He grimaced. That might have been the setup. Something about performance redundancy and strategic simplification. Performance redundancy. A fancy way to say, "You made us nervous, so we're putting a bullet in your desk." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, letting it slice the air into slow, hypnotic rotations, wondering what the hell I was doing. I had done everything right, quietly, carefully, legally. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't burned anything down. Just followed the protocol, filed a memo, and tried to protect the damn company. And they were going to toss me like expired toner. But the dread gave way to something else. Something colder, resolve. If they were going to bury me, I'd make sure I left behind something too radioactive to ignore. I opened my laptop, pulled up the original memo, and started adding layers. I built a full compliance timeline, down to the hour. I created a table mapping each ESG certification to the responsible party, who submitted it, who reviewed it, who signed off, and when. I linked every entry to internal emails, approvals, and Slack messages. Where language had been altered from my drafts, I highlighted the changes in red. Where dates had shifted post-signature, I included metadata from the version history. I wasn't just compiling evidence anymore. I was building a machine that, if set loose, could walk into an SEC inquiry and answer every question before it was even asked. I printed 2 new copies, notarized the update, and placed them in separate security envelopes. One went into the lockbox at the bank. The other I slid under the floor mat of my car, tucked in a waterproof bag beneath the emergency tire kit. They wanted to make me invisible, but if the hammer came down, I wouldn't disappear quietly. I'd detonate. It started like a weather alert, one of those cryptic internal pings that ripple through Slack before anyone at the top admits there's a storm coming. A quiet little message in legal's channel. Please confirm all certifications tied to Portfolio D are up to date and verified. No explanation, no context, just panic in passive voice. Then the real notice hit. An email blast from Richard's assistant, marked confidential board level only, which of course meant it was in my inbox within minutes, courtesy of someone in finance who still had a soul. The subject line was short and sharp. SEC Notice of Preliminary Investigation ESG Disclosures / Venture in Portfolio D. The air in the building changed. People weren't walking anymore. They were speed walking, clutching laptops like defibrillators. Jeff from finance started stress-eating tic-tacs like they were horse tranquilizers. And Richard? He held a town hall that afternoon where he smiled, joked about bureaucratic speed bumps, and said the phrase just procedural 4 times in 10 minutes. But behind the curtain, everything was on fire. The board called an emergency session. Lawyers flooded the building like rats sensing a sinking ship. Compliance logs were pulled, server histories reviewed, and suddenly everyone was acting like regulatory accuracy had always been their love language. I wasn't invited to the meeting, obviously, but I sat in my office and listened through the vent. I know, juvenile. But let me tell you, nothing makes you appreciate the architectural quirks of a glass and drywall fortress like being ghosted by your own C-suite. How did this get missed? Portfolio could be invalidated. That's $200 million in institutional funds, Richard. Whose job was it to oversee the filings? And then a name, my name, Tessa Langley. The room fell quiet. The silence had a shape to it, like the moment in a horror movie when someone realizes the call is coming from inside the house. Later that afternoon, a junior analyst, Paul again, bless his gossipy little heart, pinged me on Teams. Paul R. Hey there, looking at your old reports, what did you do? Stared at the blinking cursor. For a second, I thought about saying something diplomatic, something like just doing my job or keeping records tidy. But no, I typed, I filed them properly. Then I closed the chat and leaned back in my chair. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? I didn't whistleblow, I didn't sabotage. I didn't even leak to the press like half the people in legal probably were at that very moment. I just filed things, properly, in a system they built, with a clause they wrote through a process they had forgotten even existed. I spent the next few days watching the unraveling from a polite distance. They didn't talk to me, didn't fire me, didn't reassign me again either. It was like I had entered a weird quantum state, both invisible and suddenly radioactive. People passed me in the hall with forced smiles, like I might explode if startled. I noticed something else too. All those meetings I'd been cut out of. They stopped happening, not rescheduled, not relocated, canceled, and the documents? Oh, now they wanted documents. My inbox filled with vague requests. Could you confirm which ESG items you reviewed from Q1 through Q3? Do you happen to have the earlier drafts of the Portfolio D audit slides? Would you be able to share your notes on the certifications filed between March and June? I replied with PDFs, timestamps, meeting notes. Nothing snarky, just data, clean and complete. Like I said, I filed them properly. And with every response I sent, I imagined a little thread inside Venturin's shiny green tapestry coming undone. One by one, they tugged, and the picture started to collapse. The day it shifted, the silence changed. It wasn't the absence of noise anymore. It was the kind that presses against the walls, waiting for something to break. I knew something had landed when Marvin O'Connell, Venturin's crusty, board-appointed legal overlord, showed up on our floor. Marvin never left the executive suite unless a subpoena had handwriting on it. He walked past my office without making eye contact, which was funny considering I was the reason his loafers were even touching this carpet. 5 minutes later, He was in the compliance vault, door shut, blinds drawn. 3 hours after that, a new thread popped up in the internal document system. Access level, legal counsel only title. Memo Langley submission / oversight protocol portfolio D. I'd never seen my name in a document title that didn't involve meeting minutes or budget templates. By noon, I had a visitor. Not Richard, not Jeff. Kendra. She stepped into my office like someone carrying bad news she wasn't sure was actually bad. Hey, she said, her voice too casual. Legal's just doing some due diligence. Marvin wanted to confirm the source of a memo you filed. It was routed through the compliance channel last month. I nodded. Yes, she blinked. So you did send it? Yes, I said again, slower. Using the clause in Section 11C of the Officer-Level Employment Agreement. Required notarization, certified mail, time-stamped archive. I assume he's holding the hard copy? Her face froze just long enough to tell me yes. Yes, he was. Right, she said, clearing her throat. Okay, that's helpful. She left without another word. By 3 p.m., Marvin made the call. I don't know who he talked to. Could have been the liaison at the SEC or maybe someone higher, someone with a name that didn't get written down. But the results came trickling out like a leaky faucet, in fragments passed between departments trying to hold their breath. What I did hear, through Paul of course, was that the agency had been holding the kill switch on our $200M ESG portfolio like a drawn bow, ready to let it fly. Just waiting for confirmation of one thing: internal certification from the designated compliance officer. And guess who had been scrubbed from the executive officer list just days after filing that memo? Guess whose email account had, thanks to an overlooked permissions cascade, still retained that original officer-level tag in the metadata? Mine. See, Venturin had changed my title in the org chart, changed my calendar invites, changed my tasks and scope, and told me to go write newsletters and check hashtags for alignment. But they forgot one thing: the system kept a record. And the system said I was an officer at the time of submission, which meant, under both internal policy and federal compliance protocol, that my memo wasn't just valid, it was binding. The government had held back full invalidation because of that single point, because of me. Because somewhere deep in the agency's server room, a line of code matched my name to my title and said, wait, this one might be real. I didn't smile, not yet. But I did open my encrypted folder and drag a copy of the certified memo into a fresh USB. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I left the office early, went to a bar that didn't serve drinks with infusions, ordered a whiskey neat, and sat there watching the sunset bleed through the window like something finally exhaling. They didn't know yet, but the thread had snapped. And now the whole damn tapestry was about to come down. They summoned me like I was a visiting monarch. A formal calendar invite from the board liaison, stamped urgent, titled, Executive Session Portfolio D Oversight Clarification. No check-in or touch base. No dressing it up with pastel fonts or emojis like the usual HR deflections. This was capital L legal. The meeting was scheduled for Conference Room A, the cathedral of boardrooms with its 10-foot ceiling, lacquered table, and absurdly phallic art sculpture in the corner that Richard once called visionary. I arrived 5 minutes early, just to watch them squirm. Inside, every seat was filled. Richard was perched at the head like a dethroned king, pretending the crown hadn't slipped. Marvin O'Connell sat 2 seats down, flanked by Kendra and someone from external counsel I'd never seen before, tie too tight, face too pale. They all looked up as I walked in. Richard tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. Tessa, he said, with the fake warmth of a man who once called my role optics fluff to a client. Glad you could make time. I always make time for matters of federal oversight, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. A beat of silence. Marvin cleared his throat. Let's get right to it. The SEC has requested clarification regarding several ESG certifications tied to Portfolio D. Your previous memo has been identified as the only compliant submission within internal governance protocols. We'd like to invite you to reaffirm your findings, perhaps expand upon them for clarity. Reaffirm, expand. They wanted me to crawl back into the trench I built and dig a little deeper now that the spotlight was on it. I glanced around the table. Eyes darted, throats tightened. No one moved. Even Richard's jaw had lost its usual swagger. I folded my hands. No rush. I'm happy to clarify, I said slowly. But I do have a question before we proceed. Marvin nodded, of course. I tilted my head, looked directly at Richard, then back to Marvin. Under what role? Silence. I let it hang. Because the last time I checked, I was stripped of my executive officer designation, reassigned to internal communications, told to focus on social media hashtags and company newsletters. I leaned forward slightly. So if I'm going to clarify anything on behalf of this company, I need to know if I'm speaking as the VP of Regulatory Affairs, or just the woman who was, and I quote, playing lawyer. Richard shifted, mouth opening to interject. Marvin raised a hand to silence him. We're prepared, Marvin said carefully, to reinstate your previous title and authority, effective immediately, backdated to the date of memo submission. I raised an eyebrow. And full back pay for the demoted period, he added. I let that sink in. Let them feel the weight of my silence. And Marvin hesitated. What else do you require? Autonomy, I said, over all current and future regulatory filings. No edits without direct sign-off from my office. No policy adjustments without compliance review. Legal vetting is fine, but regulatory sign-off comes through me, non-negotiable. Someone to my left, probably the tight-tied external counsel, scribbled something on a pad. Kendra nodded. Marvin looked at Richard. Richard, who looked like he'd just bitten down on a lemon wrapped in humiliation. He said nothing, which was the smartest thing he'd done all year. Very well, Marvin said. We'll make the necessary adjustments. Immediately. I opened my folder and pulled out the updated version of my memo. 32 pages. Clean. Annotated. Ready? This is the certified clarification, I said, sliding it across the table. You'll find footnotes detailing which projects were misrepresented and which actions were taken against my advisement. I'll send the digital copy to the agency myself. Kendra reached for it, but I placed my hand over the folder. One more thing, I said. They all looked at me. If I'm going to keep this company from sinking, I do it my way. No interference, no spin, no more being the afterthought in your headlines. Richard scoffed softly. That sounds a bit dramatic. I looked him dead in the eye. So was falsifying half your sustainability filings, but here we are. He shut up after that. When the meeting adjourned, I didn't linger. No handshakes, no polite nods. I walked out the same way I walked in, straight-backed, calm, unbothered. Only this time, I wasn't just in the room, I was steering it. The edits weren't cosmetic. I didn't fix their lies with prettier lies. I peeled back the marketing gloss and wrote what should have been submitted from the beginning, clean, brutal, and honest. The updated certification memo landed at 46 pages. I trimmed all the puff, stripped-out language like innovative sustainability mechanism, which meant absolutely nothing, and replaced it with verifiable metrics. CO2 offsets, third-party audits, policy references. Where Richard and his pet projects had used phrases like green impact pending vendor data, I entered data unavailable. Internal approval granted against compliance advisement. I wasn't throwing them under the bus. I was just finally letting the facts walk on their own 2 feet. Every section ended with a footnote stating clearly, reviewer warning issued non-compliant approval. I copied everything to legal, to the oversight liaison, and most importantly, sent it directly to the agency contact listed in the official notice. I didn't wait for permission. I was the permission now. 3 days later, the SEC issued a notice. Portfolio D, temporary hold on invalidation pending clarification review. They didn't drop the investigation, but they stopped the guillotine. And in this game, a pause is the closest thing to resurrection. The markets responded like skittish cats offered a second bowl of tuna. Our institutional investors stopped fleeing. Calls stopped going unanswered. Analysts retracted doomsday headlines and replaced them with speculative breath holders. Venturing, recovery in progress. And is the compliance queen saving the fund? I hated that one, but I let it slide. The board made no public statement. Richard, however, did, sort of. He didn't appear at the next quarterly planning session, didn't show for media prep. Rumor was he'd taken a brief leave for personal reasons, which, when translated from corporatis, meant we finally realized the man who built the house on sand isn't qualified to reinforce the foundation. Internally, his keycard access was revoked for 3 floors, and his EA was reassigned to Kendra. That said enough. They didn't offer me his office. Didn't need to. I didn't want the throne, I wanted the firewall. And now I had it. The internal chain for ESG and risk compliance had been rebuilt with my signature at the top. New policy drafts routed through me. Internal reviews came before public statements. I wasn't a figurehead anymore, I was the system. And I didn't have to gloat. Didn't have to high-five the few allies who whispered, "We knew you were right." Didn't even have to look Richard in the eye when he passed me in the elevator lobby, dragging his carry-on suitcase like a busted ego on wheels. He nodded. I didn't, instead. I spent the afternoon reviewing language in our next wave of filings, sipping lukewarm tea while Marvin forwarded me 3 new regulatory inquiries from potential investors. Can we speak directly with Miss Langley on compliance controls? That's how I knew the shift was complete. They weren't asking about the CEO anymore. They were asking about me. And for once, finally, that wasn't a liability. They held the final board meeting on a Friday, just after market close, classic Ventron timing, burying the dirty work under the weekend lull like a dog hiding a chewed-up shoe. The executive floor was quiet except for the hum of legal nerves and the faint sound of someone in finance, rage typing an email 2 offices over. I didn't dress for war. Just wore my usual slate gray blazer. No makeup, no jewelry, no sharp edges. Let them see exactly what it looks like when the person you underestimated walks back into the room without needing to raise her voice. Marvin was already seated when I entered, hands folded neatly over a thick stack of papers, my papers. The memo, the timeline, the clarifications. Every receipt I'd been forced to collect like a forensic archivist just to prove I wasn't insane. The board filtered in next. Somber suits, not a peppy handshake among them. Richard arrived last, wearing that same smug mask he always did. but this time it looked brittle, too smooth, too polished like a wax figure sweating under studio lights. No one asked him to speak. Marvin stood, adjusted his cufflinks, and without preamble laid the packet on the center of the table. "This saved us," he said. No dramatic pause, no credit roll, just those 3 words. The table was dead silent. Then Marvin turned to Richard. His jaw was locked, muscles in his face tight like a man chewing the last bite of a bad decision. "Get her," Marvin said, "now." Richard blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard him," said Joanne, one of the longest-serving board members, tapping her stylus against her tablet like a gavel. Unanimous vote pending confirmation. All in favor, one by one the hands went up. Deliberate, unapologetic, every single one. The vote to remove Richard Dane as CEO passed in under 30 seconds. He didn't storm out. He didn't cry or argue or yell. Just sat there with his lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line as 2 members of the security team, who I'm pretty sure were borrowed from an investor's private firm, flanked his chair. He stood, gathered his phone, and finally looked at me. No smugness left, no grin, just a tired sort of disbelief. Like he was realizing the game had been rigged the whole time, just not in his favor. I didn't look away. I didn't smirk. I didn't offer him the dignity of a goodbye. I simply opened the folder in front of me, my first agenda as Chief Risk Officer, and began to read. The title didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a correction. By late afternoon, his name was scrubbed from the executive roster. My new access badge had already been programmed, and a fresh set of contracts, this time written on my terms, were waiting for my signature. No champagne, no party. Just me in my new office on the 15th floor. Glass walls, no blinds, total visibility. I brewed a cup of tea and sat down at my desk, watching the sun sink behind the skyline like the end of a long, ridiculous fever dream. There was one item on the monitor, stuck in place with a yellow sticky note from someone in IT who must have known the full story. The note said, "Not just for show." I took a sip, didn't smile, didn't need to. I'd already won. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.